end of each family group. Or if you prefer and you think you might forget your question, put something in the chat and Dave will monitor that. So I'm going to go at a fairly rapid pace here because some of you, I'm fairly sure, would have been through this with me previously. And the whole thing is being recorded. You probably just heard that voice to tell us so, which means you'll be able to watch it again on the Tracking the Impact website. You'll be able to find a link on the Tracking the Impact website. And afterwards, therefore, you'll be able to just go in and watch it at whatever time you want, at the speed you like, and replay bits and so on.
That's
Okay,
right.
so I'm about to share my screen.
Sorry, Nick. Perhaps if I could ask everybody to just turn your videos off to save everybody's bandwidth and just mute your microphones, or I can do it for you.
Okay,
Thank you, Nick.
that was a good call there, Dave. So I hope everybody can see the screen, and if you can't, wave your hand or raise a hand using the icon thingy. But identifying butterflies Upper Thames region in the spring. We're mostly concentrating on things in the Chilterns, but I am going to mention a few species beyond the Chilterns because they're potential confusion, and I know a lot of people like to go outside the Chilterns and see extra things. This is I believe, my most important piece of information that I'm going to give you if you want a single detail to take away and remember. Looking at the edge of a wing, often the wing tips, but not always, the edges of the wings is far more helpful to you with almost every butterfly than looking at the center of the wing. So if you look at the center of the wing, you might come away with an impression, well, it was mostly brown, or it was mostly blue, or it was most, but the detail that actually separates the species is almost always at the wing edge. There are one or two species where that isn't true, but it's usually true. So as it says below, and you've read it, obviously you want to know if it's blue or brown or white, and you want to know if it's got things like crinkly edges or straight edges, curvy edges, and if it's got eye spots and all the rest of those little details. But the wing edge is the place to concentrate on before the butterfly flies away. Don't wait till it's gone and then think, oh, I should have looked at the edge. So size and actions, location and time of year are always helpful. There are I had a message today asking me whether somebody might have seen a silver spotted skipper. No, wrong time of year. So some things can be ruled out because they don't fly this early in the year. As I've said there, if a butterfly is very actively searching about and chasing things, flies, bees, and other butterflies, then it's a male. And that's helpful to know because sometimes the males of some species of butterfly look different to the females. The females rarely chase anything at any speed. They will occasionally fly at speed to try and avoid males, but mostly they lurk fairly close to their food plants and don't move much at all. That they're much heavier than the males, for one thing, which tends to slow them up. But in addition, there's no point them making themselves obvious the way the males are prepared to do because they may be predated if they do that. Our first group are the nymphalids. And you'll see I've tried to split them roughly into two groups. There are some which, when you see them fly around, appear to be orange. That's a vague description. Small tortoiseshell comma painted lady, but others, when they fly past you, look really dark, and those are the peacock and the red admiral. It's often possible to tell the small tortoiseshell and the comma from the others because they look smaller as well, but sometimes it's hard to get a judgment of size. So let's go through the orangey ones. And the comma has its very ragged wing edges and yellow lunules, the little triangles that point in towards the center of the wing from the edges. And you'll all remember that wing edges are important. So I'm moving my mouse where the lunules are. So the yellow lunules here, show you, if you didn't know, just from the rather ragged edge of the wing, that this is a comma because the tortoiseshell down here, look, the lunules are blue. The painted lady doesn't have lunules at all, and the painted lady has this very obvious black and white tip. The others don't, do they? This is stripy across the top, and someone said it reminds them of a tiger. once, which I repeat because it might be that something that you'll pick out and remember. Coming back to painted ladies and whether you're likely to see them at the moment, there were quite a few around early on, February, March. I haven't heard of any in the last week, but that doesn't mean that today's hot weather hasn't brought some in. So it is worth being prepared to think to yourself, well, there might be a painted lady about. They normally appear in this country late in May as opposed to early in May, but this year's been ridiculously warm early on. Let's go on. Peacock really doesn't need very much description. If you get to see those four bright eyes, peacock is pretty simple to identify. There is a moth called the emperor moth, which has got eyes on it as well, but it isn't anything like as colorful as a peacock. Red Admiral and Painted Lady. I put these together. The Red Admiral is obviously almost black compared with the largely orange field of the Painted Lady, just to point out the wingtips are the same or very similar. So it shows how closely related these two butterflies are, that they've got that feature in common. And I'd forgotten this, but I'm glad I made that note to remind myself. When you look at the wingtip on a painted lady, which is mostly orange and black with some white, if you're not familiar with your butterflies and you only see this briefly, you might think, oh my goodness, there's a fritillary. But because you've been on this course and know that you're supposed to be looking at the wing edges and tips first and the middle of the wing second, you'll have noticed that black and white tip because you don't get a black triangle with those white spots in on a fritillary. They tend to be black and white amongst the orange spread evenly across the wing. And the underside of the Red Admiral and Painted Lady, in my opinion, are absolutely glorious. The Red Admiral being a lot darker because it's found in more northern climates most of the time, and it tends to hide up through the colder months of the year inside dark spaces, little holes and so on. So it needs to look dark when it's resting. But the Painted Lady spends a lot of its time resting in desert and semi-desert places, so it looks very sandy coloured, and it's quite capable of sitting on the ground and being fairly happy there overnight, whereas the Red Admiral tends to go up into trees and find holes. Now, the speckled wood is another member of the nymphalid family, but people tend not to consider it such, but it is because all the browns are. It's a very big family. This is the member of the nymphalid family you're likely to see at this time of year. There's one more that we'll talk about later, but this one's the one that might just, because it's big enough, make you think, could that butterfly have been a tortoiseshell, a comma, even perhaps a red admiral, because it was big and dark. When they settle, I think you'll find they're relatively simple to tell from everything else because the spots on the wing with these black, I was going to call them pupils, but that's the wrong word, like a black iris and a white pupil is something you don't pale creamy spots and then black centered, no, white centered black spots within the paler cream spots. The underside of the speckled wood, this can be tricky to see because it's very clever at sitting in places where it manages to have almost no shadow, but it does have a bit of a shadow. And one thing you will appearance to the hind wing. It's not obvious on the upper surface, but it is when it closes its wings. So that's something else that might be a tip. If you can't see the color very well for some reason, but you can see that it's pleated speckled wood. And here's the underside of the other species, just for a comparison. The comma's wavy outline is a real giveaway, and they do sit like this. This is the way that they roost, rest, and feed. The small tortoise shell folds itself up more neatly, but it's still got these blue lunules. And the peacock looks similar to both, apart from being smoother than the comma, but perhaps a bit more pointy than the tortoise shell. But the point here is that the peacock doesn't really have much contrast between the area closest to the body and then the area furthest away from the body, nearer the wing edge. So there are basically two color tones with a line between them, which is relatively straight. If you look at the comma and the tortoiseshell, you can see the line between the dark and the light is quite wiggly. And the contrast between these two areas is more marked. Okay, and there's the speckled wood again, just for comparison. It too has a marginally darker center and paler outside. But look at all these little eye spots showing through and the crinkly pleated nature. Okay, so before we talk about the whites, I just wonder if anybody wants to check anything about the nymphalids that we've covered.
Any questions for Nick? Pop them in the chat if they occur to you later.
Sounds like nobody's bursting with questions, which is good because they are a relatively straightforward group. Unfortunately, that's not true, is it, of the whites? The whites are the butterflies that you're going to see most often and not identify. There is no shame in it, honestly. Most people watch a white butterfly fly past them. If they tell you they know what it was when it was 10 meters away, I'm afraid they're probably making it up because it isn't possible for many of the whites that you will see. And people say, well, how am I supposed to record it? The answer is you can't. You can't record it because there's no point, I'm afraid, recording I saw a white, but I don't know what it is, because that can't go into any of the recording schemes. So I've split them into two groups again. It helps possibly. The ones which seem small and to fly slightly more feebly are the wood white, which is really feeble in its flight and very small. That's only in North Bucks in our region these days. Female orange tip looks white and flies relatively feebly. Then the green vein white and the small white both look white and are smaller than the brimstone and the large, but I'm afraid they don't always fly feebly and they can race about. They often look, especially the small white, often flies as if it's on a really important mission to get somewhere before it's late for a meeting or something of the sort. The wood white and the female orange tip are much more likely to be fluttering around, but all four look white, as does the female brimstone, not yellow like the male, it looks white. And the large white, of course, is also white, but this one you can sometimes see the black tips. So let's quickly tell the difference between brimstones here with its pointy tips, look, and a pale lemony yellow, and the clouded yellow, which isn't in the country at the moment, as far as I know. It might just be emerging down on the south coast where it overwinters as larva. And there might be some immigrating at the moment with this hot plume that's come up from the Sahara. But anyway, the clouded yellow is a darker yellow. It looks darker yellow, like a custard colored. And it doesn't have the pointy tips, look. It does have this prominent white dot here on the hind wing. Small white and large white. Here's something that is really simple, a really easy way to tell these two apart, which seem to struggle, which seem to confuse some people who struggle. Look at the wing tips, because we know we're supposed to be looking at the edges, not the middle. The wing tip of the small white has a very small amount of grey because there's so few black scales, and the large white has a large amount. The small white, the black scales hardly come round the corner. They just do. The large white, they come right the way down to halfway down the wing. Now, one thing that does confuse people, if they've got one of the older identification books and one of the older guides that was one of the sort of a poster type guide, it showed the small white, as I have here, a male, and a large white, it showed the female. And loads of people thought, oh, there are two spots on the large white and one spot on the small white, but that is not true. So here's a male and a female small white. So the spots tell you which sex you're looking at, not the species. The female small white, look, she's still got very few black scales. The female brimstone, when she flies, looks whiter than she does here when she's settled. So she looks very white, but of course it's a brimstone, so it's still got the pointy wingtips. And the green vein white, you should always be able to see these grey triangles coming in at the wing edge. So wing edges, and you might like to test yourself whether this is a male or a female. And I can hear you all confidently and correctly saying female because it's got two spots. Well done. So we've got one of the whites there, another one here, and a third there. So between them, these are small, green-veined, enlarged. Which one do you think is which? Which one do you think has got the smallest amount of black scales in the wingtip? Which one do you think has got the largest amount of black in the wingtip? And that rather leaves the green vein white as the one between the two, doesn't it? So small white. One of the things which is usually seen with a small white is that the majority of grey speckling on the hind wing is below this midpoint. There's a vein that goes across there. Obviously, the grey scales are all over along the veins of a green vein white, but with a large white, they're also all over. They're just sort of randomly scattered. Occasionally, you get a small white which has got more of these black scales scattered across the hind wing, but it's rare. And the large white is normally a bit yellower. Again, the small white can be quite yellow, but the difference between the amount of black showing through at the wing tip is a real obvious thing, I think. Okay. Orange tip. The male shouldn't present any problem at all. Please notice that we're looking at the wing edge, of course, that it's got black and white alternately along the wing edge. None of the others did they? The others were either sort of grayish smudge or a really obvious black or black triangles coming in. The underside is beautiful, isn't it? This one's sitting on lady's smock, and that's an egg of an orange tip that may have been laid on lady's smock. I can't remember. And here's the female orange tip. So notice, look, the same black and white wing edge, but no orange. And its underneath is exactly the same as the male with that beautiful green patterning. And just in case you think you might mix it up with a green vein white, remember the green vein white's got these triangles coming in. Not a black and white edge look, but triangles coming in. And these are both females. So the orange tip, just to be awkward, doesn't have two black spots on the wing of a female. It only has one, just here, exactly the same as the male. Let's go back. Now, I've put the wood white in a picture for your interest, perhaps, and education. The wood white, the difference between it and the others is that there is this almost circular blob here of black. If the wings were open, you would see it, but it never sits with its wings open. If it's involved in courtship, it will flap its wings slowly open and close, and you'll be able to see that black blob more clearly. But notice how these grey scales run across the wing. And if we go back, the green vein white, all the scales go along the veins. They don't go across the wing at all. So that's another pointer. Okay, so we're finished with the whites, the trickiest group, I think. Some people disagree and think it's the fritillaries, but I think the whites are hard because they're very active, often fly past you without stopping. Any questions about the whites, folks?
Sure, there will be over the season, Nick, but not for now.
in because they're sort of similar, and the small copper and the duke are from different families, but the small copper being part of the family of the blue butterflies doesn't really seem to fit there quite so well. And things that you might confuse a small copper and duke, both small and orange, with are things like small heath and possibly marsh fritillary, which, if you don't know the duke and you see a marsh fritillary, you might mix it up. I've mentioned burnet companion, which is a day flying moth, and you'll notice what I've said about it. The duke, the small copper, and the marsh fritillary will always sit usually on top of a bush or a small um, outgrowth of something like a bramble, even on top of some tall grasses. They always sit on top and they're looking around to see what else is about. The small heath will go down into the grass, but it doesn't dive into cover the way the burnet companion does, which often you can only see part of it because it tries to bury itself out of sight. And the painted lady is orange as well, or can appear orange as well, but it's much bigger, much bigger. So here's the small copper. There is no other butterfly, and in this country, no other day flying moth that's got this pattern of orange and then black edge and black and orange edge, a contrast. And strangely enough, the underside, quite different. The black of the hind wing on the upper surface is replaced by a sort of a fawny colour on the undersurface. The orange of the forewing shows through, and the spots you'll notice are lined with white or creamy colour around them, whereas on the forewing upper side, the black spots are not. So the upper side and the underside are slightly different, and you might, if you saw this one day and then it disappeared, and then a different day you saw this, you might think, oh, they're two different species, but no, it just looks very different with its wings closed. The small heath, which you could, down here, the small heath, which you could confuse with a small copper, because both have got this orange forewing, and when they fly past you, they both look orange in flight. When they settle, this one looks sort of fawny coloured, you might say, a bit like the small copper, but look at this very pale mark here, which extends halfway across the wing. When we go out on Saturday and catch a small heath to show people, you'll be able to see this clearly with it in a pot. And once someone has pointed out to you that there's a pale mark going across the wing of a small heath there, you can't fail to see it. It is a really good indicator of species. Look at any small orange butterfly with its wings shut, see that half a stripe of white or cream across here, and there's nothing else it could be but small heath. So this butterfly is breaking our rule, and it's not the wing edge we look at, it's that strikingly pale mark. It stands out really well in the field. The small heath, by the way, is a member of the brown family, and it's the first one to fly in the year, apart from speckled wood that we dealt with already. And then we've got the marsh fritillary and the Duke of Burgundy. We might see both on Saturday. The marsh fritillary is larger, and I think you can see that it's got a much more contrasted pattern to it. For most people, it's very unlikely, most people anywhere in the Upper Thames branch, it's very unlikely you'll see marsh fritillary, but we might get one at Income Hole. The Duke of Burgundy, I think you can see, is less colourful, and the thing that stands out probably is that look at the hind wing edge. And the hind wing edge, you've got the same orange colour as the forewing, but the marsh fritillary is much brighter orange, and then it's got these lunules, as we call them, which are really creamy coloured in a black band right at the edge. And the Duke doesn't have that. So the edge of the hind wing is a very good marker, but you could look at various other things like the fact that the forewing edge is checkered, alternate black and white on a Duke, and it's completely black with a white outside on the marsh. Okay. Now, here is the Burnet companion day flying moth. As I said previously, it it can be a nuisance because it looks a lot like a Duke of Burgundy when it flies past you. But when it lands, you'll see that it's got stripes across the wing, not a checkerboard, stripes across the wing, and it's really quite orange here. This one's a fairly yellow specimen. They can be more orange than that, but it's rare to see them doing what this one is doing and sitting out in the open, nectaring on a flower. You often see them at least partly covered by the vegetation into which they've flown at some speed. Uh, does anybody want to ask any questions about the small copper, small heath, marsh fritillary and duke? Well, I suppose it might be that something's happened to my sound, but I can't hear anyone telling me that they do want to ask questions.
No, I don't think so.
Right,
Everything's
on we
okay.
go. Two brands in the spring. We just mentioned speckled wood and small heath. I'm not going to go through all that again because we just did. But this year, things are so early that before the end of May, you might well see a meadow brown, possibly a ringlet. I don't think you'll see gatekeeper. But if things continue to fly as early as they are, meadow brown and ringlet might fly. So let's have a quick look. Everybody remembers, of course, that this half a stripe, very pale mark here tells us we're looking at a small heath because we just talked about that. Speckled wood has got this sort of pleated edge on the hind wing. The meadow brown has a complete white band here, doesn't it? So it's pale, darker, a white band across, and then a bit darker again. The small heath is darker, half a band, and then darker again. And the small heath and meadow brown have a single eye spot there on the forewing. The speckled wood has a single one on the forewing that you can see on the underside, but it has a few more down the hind wing. And the ringlet, of course, has lots of eye spots, each one ringed, as somebody once said to me, with a creamy halo. And I thought that was so attractive a description that I've stuck to it. So rather like the speckled wood and the meadow brown and the small heath, the black eyes have a white pupil. So that's small heath, that mark there, which is half a stripe, really good indicator. The sort of pleated appearance of the speckled wood with some small light eyes down the hind wing. Meadow brown, a single eye spot on the forewing with a white pupil, and then the complete pale stripe. It's not as striking, this stripe, as the one on the small heath. It's not as well contrasted, but it goes right the way across the wing. And the ringlet, I think, fairly unmistakable because of all these eyes with their creamy halos. Okay. So here's the upper surface. Single eye spot, a bit of orange. Ringlet, multiple eye spots, just like on the underside. And the speckled wood, all those creamy spots all over, if you remember, with some black eyes and white pupils on the hind wing. So very different, I think. Although I would admit that when they've been flying for a week or so, the meadow brown and the ringlet begin to look very similar because they fade. And picking out these rather faint eye spots on the ringlet's forewing becomes more difficult. So it is more difficult to tell the ringlet from the meadow brown as the butterflies get worn. But when they're fresh, clearly different. And one thing that does stand out on a fresh ringlet is the very white wing edge. So very strong contrast with a dark ground color in the center. The meadow brown never has the same amount of contrast. It always looks as if it's sort of dingy, a bit grubby. whereas the ringlet is really white. But unfortunately, as you probably know, these edges wear away. So that's only on the fresh specimens that you can see that. Okay, perhaps we ought to stop for a moment if there are any questions about the browns. They don't normally excite questions, but let's see.
How easy is it to get confused between that with that white stripe on the underside going all the way, or I suppose you'll show it on Saturday, but
Well, we won't show it Saturday because we won't see a meadow brown, but just to go back
okay.
to it, this mark here on the small heath, honestly, it really stands out in the field far better than in my picture. And the meadow brown, if you can see this, which sometimes it's so um, lacking in contrast from the
Right.
colors either side that it's barely visible. But if you can see it, it obviously goes right the way across the wing. Added to which, the meadow brown's twice the size of the small heath usually, so that helps because the small heath genuinely is small. I think once we've all seen a small heath on Saturday, it'll be something that people will be able to identify easily. It seems more difficult than it really is my opinion. I don't know whether you've seen, Dave, there's somebody in the waiting room. No more questions? You are a very compliant audience, not asking me difficult questions. Thank you so much. Let's go on. The blues. Okay, well, I've tried to sort them by size, but to be perfectly honest, it's hardly a difference that will stand out because unless you see small blue and brown Argus at their smallest size, they all look very similar. The biggest is the chalk hill blue, the Adonis just behind it, then common and holly, purple hair streak, but they're mostly very similar and all of them, in honesty, are small. But there is a difference between the color of blue in the ones that are blue. So within the Chilterns, if you see a really blue butterfly, it's one of these three, Adonis, common, or holly. The Adonis is so blue, I mean, so incredibly blue, that you could never see an Adonis in being any doubt that it might be something else. You could see a very brightly coloured common blue or holly blue and think to yourself briefly, is that an Adonis blue? But knowing that the Adonis blue is immensely blue, it's so blue it's hardly true. You would never make the mistake once you had seen an Adonis blue. So it's possible to think you've seen an Adonis blue and you haven't. It is not possible to see an Adonis blue and think, oh, I wonder if that's a holly blue. The small blue and brown Argus both look bluish, but more silvery actually. When they settle, you'll see that their wings are dark. But they can look blue in flight or bluish, more silvery really. Now I produced this key because some people told me they really struggled with the blues. So I suggested you might like to start with, if you've got a butterfly settled in front of you, is the upper wing, that's the upper surface of the forewing, apparently brown, in which case it's brown Argus or small blue, or it's one of the females of the other blue species, which is a nuisance because the females of many blue species, and the three that we're talking about this evening in the Chilterns, the females of blue butterflies are brown too. If it's very small and near kidney, it's almost always small blue. Kidney vetch, I mean the plant. If it's away from kidney vetch, if you can't see any kidney vetch about, then it's probably a brown Argus. Here's my tip. If it's flying about, you really have got to wait for it to stop or use your net. I advocate using a net. Check any males that are flying nearby, because if there are some blue colored males about, you could see what they are, and that would tell you conceivably whether you'd seen a small or some other blue butterfly. But anyway, you can't always tell. Anyway, going down a bit. If the butterfly looks blue as opposed to brown, then if it's really pale and often flying very high up, not always, but often flying high up above the tops of bushes, then a holly blue. Whereas a blue which is a slightly more purpley color and closer to the ground is usually the common blue. As I said, the extremely bright blue one is the Adonis. All the females are impossible to tell apart in flight. Some of the female common blues, as I've said, have quite a bit of blue on the wing, but you can't normally see it when they're flying. And the bit in bold at the bottom, something which, if you think about it, is surprising. Holly blue females are entirely blue. No other female blue butterfly is entirely blue. Right, so let's go through them. Now, I think this is the best way to separate them by the fact that there are two species which don't have any red, no red at all. So if you see a butterfly which looks blue or bluish or silvery, and you can tell, well, it must be a member of the blue family, and there is no red anywhere at all, then it's either a holly blue or a small blue. The holly blues, if they open their wings, the male and the female are blue. So there's no red anywhere. It's blue. It's a holly blue. Conversely, no red anywhere, and it looks really dark navy blue, almost slate gray. It's a small blue because both the male and the female are this color. Sometimes the males have a sort of a blue sheen to them close to the body, but they don't look blue, this color blue. And in addition, if you only see these butterflies with their wings closed, you'll probably notice the holly blue has little streaks of black, whereas the small blue has dots with white rings around them. The holly blue also, if you get the chance to look at it, because you know about looking at the wing edges, you might pick up on this, has a checkered wing edge look. Only on the forewing, though. It's the only one of the blue butterflies that has just the forewing with a checkered edge. The small blue has no checkering at all anywhere. So as I say, it's a really good thing to look for if you see a blue butterfly and you're not sure which species it is, you've got no idea at the beginning. First thing to check, does it have any red lunules anywhere? Is there any red on it at all anywhere? And if not, you know it's either a holly blue or a small blue. And, well, you can read that without me telling you what it says. So here we've got female common blue, and this is the upper surface, obviously, showing you might argue these aren't red, they're orange, but bear with me, pretend they're red. And here's a brown Argus, and even these you might argue are not really red, they're orange, but we're calling them red just because it's easier than getting into the semantics of it. They are obviously butterflies with some red on them. And if we could see the undersides, we'll look at those pictures in a minute, they've got red on as well. Notice that the difference between the common blue, which I like to alliterate, the common blue has a clear border, but the brown Argus, look, has got these little black veins coming into the border. So it's got a checkered border. Now, the fact that the common blue has this clear border is a way to tell it apart from almost all the other blues. If you remember, the holly blue had the forewing checkered. The brown Argus has all the wings, not strongly, but sufficiently strongly that you can see that there are checkerings, or there is checkering. And in addition, with the brown Argus, these orange or red lunules on the forewing go all the way to the top, and on the hind wing, the red lunules are completely red with no blue, whereas on the common blue, there's often blue visible. So several ways to tell those two apart. If we look at the underside, it's even easier. The brown Argus is much more silvery, but we want to look at the wing edges, don't we? So we're looking for the black veins that go through the edge, the checkering that I've referred to. And there it is on the brown Argus, but the common blue, a clear border. If you want to do it by looking at the dots, you'll see that the common blue has a spot just there. And if you look at the brown Argus, you'll see the same space on the wing. There's no spot, completely missing. If you look at the common blue, you'll see that there is a relatively smooth arc just here. All the spots seem to be in a sort of a C shape, don't they? And then look at the brown Argus, and well, they go all over the place, more like a question mark. These two spots are the ones which people refer to as looking a bit like a figure 8 or a colon. Black spots with paler rings around them, which you don't get that same alignment. There isn't the same smooth shape to the wing, and those two spots being together is something you can pick out quite quickly in the field if you know to look for it. So there I'm trying to show the difference in the alignment, the arrangement of the spots. But if you remember, I was saying a little while ago about the blues, you're looking, one of the things to help you separate at the very beginning is whether there's red. Well, obviously these have got red on them. Now, common blue and Adonis blue. On their top surface, looking at them this way, showing us their wings very nicely, thank you. You can see how the blue of the Adonis is so brilliant. There is no red visible. I'd agree with you if you were to say, well, I can't see any red. It must be a small blue or a holly blue. No, because the red's on the underside of the males. But anyway, common blue, clear border written here, completely white border, no veins coming into it at all. Adonis blue, the checkering is even more obvious than on the brown Argus. And if we look at their undersides, here's the red lunules on the underside of the common blue in that C-shaped mark I mentioned. And here's the Adonis blue. It's a bit more like a question mark, isn't it here? But the thing that really tells you it's an Adonis blue is the fact that it's got this checkered border, really obviously checkered. So here are some males, and I'm going to ask you to have a look at them and see if you can guess which two species these are. So I'm hoping that everyone's remembering I've been banging on about look to see if there's any red as your starting point, and I've helpfully placed a pointer. So on this side, we do have some red, so it can't be small blue, and it can't be holly blue. And over here, we don't have any red. So it's either small blue or holly blue. And the small blue is slate gray, very dark navy perhaps. So this must be holly blue. And indeed, holly blue with checkered edges on the forewing. Whereas over here, what have you gone for? Have you noticed that it's got clear borders? A white border without any. Here you can see, can't you? The veins end, and they are visible there, but they don't go through the border. It's not checkered in the same way. Right, well, if you go down into Berkshire or bits of Surrey in the next month or so, you might find silver-studded blues. We don't get them anywhere in our Upper Thames region apart from a little bit in southeast Berkshire. But the silver-studded blue is slightly smaller than the common blue, perhaps the size of the brown Argus, and looks superficially very similar, clear borders, just like the common blue, but there's a black line inside the white border, which is quite broad, fairly broad black line. The common blue does have a black line separating the blue from the white edge, but it's very thin. And you won't find silver-studded blue, I'm afraid, anywhere else in our three counties apart from southeast Berkshire, which is a great shame because it's a lovely butterfly, but unfortunately it can't cope with, it needs, it has an association with an ant, and it needs that ant if it's going to get through its life cycle. And the ant can't live in grasslands which have got very strongly growing grasses. So the ant's restricted to heathland, where the grass is rather sparse, and that's why we don't see it, because it hasn't got the associated ants anywhere else in our counties. Silver-studded blue on the underside, this little bluish silvery scale here is the silver stud. And here's a pair of brown Argus and common blue, just for comparison. So you can see the lack of the scales, and you've noticed immediately that this has got a checkered fringe. So it must be the brown Argus with those two dots together like that, the colon. And here's the common blue with a clear border and a relatively smooth sea. You might argue, well, it could be an Adonis because we can't see what color the blue is inside. Okay, but if it was an Adonis, then it would have a checkered border, wouldn't it? So it's got to be a common blue. Always clear white borders. Any questions about the blues? I'm assuming no. Okay, let's go on to the hair streaks. As it says here, best observed with the binoculars, even telescopes. I'll just very quickly mention that we've recently started looking for hair streak larvae using UV torches. Perhaps you understand without me telling you, that means you're going out and searching at night. But it's an extremely effective way of finding them because they photoluminesce, which is to say they glow in the dark. Makes them easy to find. The hair streak that's around at the moment, and which we should easily see on Saturday and next Saturday as well, is the green hair streak. Absolutely beautiful little thing with his stripy socks on his legs and his stripy antenna and a beautiful green color. The only issue with seeing the green hair streak is that it manages to sit very still on green leaves in bushes, and it's virtually invisible unless you saw it land and you know where to look. When they fly about, by the way, I've written it here, it looks very dark brown and the flight is rapid. Small, dark brown in flight, obviously green when it settles, but very well camouflaged. And I think that's the reason quite a few people say they've never seen one. They're tricky to spot in the first place. Once you see them, they're dead easy to identify because, as I've said, it's our only green butterfly. We might, before we get to our next recording, have people reporting the black hair streak, the one down here. I put the white letter in because they're really similar and easily confused. But the white letter, which has a slightly more obvious W shape there than the one on the black hair streak, but there's not a lot in it. The difference that's most reliable is that the white letter hair streak has a black line inside the red band, a complete line, and the black hair streak has it, what might have been a black band at one time in its evolution, separated into black blobs with a white inside edge. So you're looking at the wing edge-ish. You're looking just inside the wing edge to separate these two. They're both really nice butterflies, and they're both blooming elusive, very difficult to spot. They can be fairly common if you come to the right place at the right time, but more often than not, you will spend ages looking for them, and then just when you think you're going to get a decent view of it because you've spotted one, it will fly into a bush or a tree and hide behind the leaves between you and it. Very annoying. We've only got 3 hair streaks. I will pause for a minute in case there's a question. I don't mean to say we've only got three hair streaks in the region. We've got more, but what I mean to say is we're only dealing with three today. Okay. Day flying moths. Um, I've put about them settling in the vegetation. I'll mention as well that when they fly, quite often it's because you've disturbed them and they fly very rapidly to find somewhere else to hide. They have a sort of a whirring motion. One of the reasons for that is the way that their wings join together. So, using my mouse, if I show you here, the forewing has a line of like Velcro along this edge that attaches it to the hind wing on this side, and the other side the same. These two wings are attached. So when they fly, it beats these two wings together. But a butterfly, all four wings move separately. And that makes for a difference in the way they fly. These are more whirring. They tend to spiral rather than fly directly. So you can tell a moth from a butterfly by the way it flies very often. But also, as I've said several times now, they're more likely to settle actually in the vegetation rather than on top of it. The day flying moths, I think, are equally interesting as the butterflies, but for some reason, most people look at the butterflies and ignore the moths. I'm not quite sure why, but they are glorious. I mentioned the emperor moth earlier as having eyes when we were talking about the peacock. But as you can see, although the emperor moth is wonderful, it doesn't have the same color in the eyes. Right, here are some day flying moths. We'll probably see all these on Saturday. Well, maybe not the hummingbird hawk. Anyway, silver Y with that little mark there, which is the silver of its Y. The burnet companion we already mentioned with stripy and an orange band across the back of the hind wing. These little things, pyralid moths, this one's sometimes called the mint moth, and this one the purple and gold. Mother Shipton down here, which I'll just take time to point at the nose of the witch, the eye of the witch, and the open mouth of the witch's face. Mother Shipton was a famous witch. So there's her face on the moth's wing. And if you needed more proof that this woman who had the unfortunate deformity that her bones grew rather more than they should, so she got a very long nose and a very long chin. If you needed any more proof than the fact that she was ugly to prove that she was a witch, there was a moth that looked just like her. Obvious proof. But she didn't get burnt at the stake or dunked in a pond because she convinced people she was a good witch and she sold love potions. Marketing, it's all about the marketing. Right, small yellow underwing looks very similar to these two when it flies, but the small yellow underwing doesn't have the pale golden coloured spots on the forewing, only the orangey colour on the hind wing. And the hummingbird hawk moth, you're probably all familiar with it. Again, it's got the orangey colour here, so when it flies, that can look quite orange, but it's the one that hovers in front of flowers, isn't it? Now, sadly, all these, when they fly past and you're looking for things like dingy skipper, grizzled skipper, Duke of Burgundy, small copper, they can be a confusion. So it's worth learning them, even if it's only to rule them out. I'd say so you can enjoy them too. But some people, uh, they're young and they haven't learned yet that moths can be good too. There are white-looking day-flying moths as well as orangey-looking ones. These are all smaller than the white butterflies, mind. Common carpet, absolutely glorious. They're called carpets, by the way, because they reminded people of the way that carpets used to be woven in the Asia and the Middle East and Turkey and places like that. Grass rivulet, that one won't be on the wing for a little while yet. The white plume, with its very striking T shape, and the treble bar, which is the biggest of these white moths. Treble bar, I think you probably worked out without me telling you, because it's got three bars of sort of blackish across it. And then there are some which are obviously paler than orange, the shaded broad bar, the common heath, and the yellow shell. All these three are more likely to be seen from mid-May onwards. We might get one on Saturday, but I think it's unlikely. And then there are just a few that look green, the small emerald, the green carpet, and the Forester, which looks more turquoise, doesn't it? The Forester, rather like the three I mentioned up there, more likely to be seen from mid-May onwards. In fact, even in June is more likely, I think. But this year things are early, so you might see it. I don't think you'd mix them up with a green hair streak because their wing, the way they hold their wings, their resting position is quite different, isn't it? Any questions about any day flying moths? No, apparently not. You'll be pleased to hear, folks, we're on to the last bit. So if your brains aren't completely fried, hang in there for a little bit longer and we'll be through. Spring skippers are really small. They look grey or dark brown, sometimes a bit orangey, but not usually. Whereas the summer skippers do look orange. So let's deal with the spring skippers first. Here we are. There are two of them. The grizzled, which is really nicely checkerboard, chessboard, sort of black and white, and or very dark brown and white. And on the underside, the color can often be quite sandy brown or reddish brown with these pale white spots on it. This is the smallest skipper, and it can be quite tricky because it's very small, it flies very close to the ground, and it doesn't hang about for anybody. So you're quite likely to scare one away and it will fly off in front of you, and you might lose track of it. But with practice, you can get better at following them as they zigzag through the vegetation. And if you scare a male and you wait long enough or go back to the spot where you saw it before, it's probably returned to very close to where you saw it. They're quite territorial. Dingy skipper's a bit bigger, still small, but a bit bigger and quite a lot darker. Dingy skipper's a bit unfortunate, really, as a name, isn't it? When it's roosting, the dingy skipper wraps itself around dead flower heads like this. It finds the seed case to some plant, very often knapweeds, sometimes self-healed, and it folds itself around them. It's the only one of our British butterflies that deliberately folds its wings away from the back, so covering up its legs when it roosts at night. Right, have a quick look, folks. Which one are the butterflies and which ones are the moths? Well, I'm assuming because you seem to be so much on the ball, I've had no questions from anyone, which either means people aren't listening or that they're really good at this, and I'm assuming the latter. You've seen that this one is a moth, the mother shipton, and this one is the butterfly that it looks like. This is the grizzled skipper. The grizzled skipper's smaller than the mother shipton. That's a relatively, I was going to say large, small moth. That's a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? But when we see them on Saturday, you'll realize what I mean. It's slightly bigger than the grizzled skipper and slightly bigger than the dingy skipper, which is over here. And this one at the bottom with the stripes across the wing and the orange at the back is the Burnet companion. Okay. It's entirely possible that by the end of May, people are going to be seeing large skippers. The large skipper, mostly orange ground color with sort of olive khaki around the wing edges and then a black line. But ignoring the black line, we've got this olivey khaki with some of the orange ground color coming into it as spots. And that's a pattern which is replicated on the underside where you can see, look, an orange ground color with some sort of khaki olive color and some pale spots just showing through. Just showing through. They can be quite bright, those spots, but normally they are not. The butterfly which has the spots much more obviously marked is the silver spotted, where the upper surface, there is usually more contrast between the orange ground color and the spots in the olive, which is nearer brown here, isn't it? Which helps to give you a stronger contrast, of course. And the underside, the contrast is even more marked because these really do look white. I don't think silver spotted is quite fair. I think white spotted would be more accurate, but silver spotted probably help people sell it better. Anyway, if you do see a very strongly marked large skipper, these spots can be quite creamy, and you might think, oh, it could be a silver spotted skipper that's got worn so that the spots aren't so bright. But only the silver spotted skipper has these 1, 2, 3 silver spots just here. So even if your large skipper has these spots in this sort of arc here, really clear, they will never be spots in that area which are clear. Silver spotted skipper shows them well. And in fact, another way to tell them apart, and I've mentioned it here, the large skipper's quite happy flying about some distance above the ground. I'm not talking about 2 meters up, but sort of up to knee height and perhaps a bit higher. The silver spotted skipper is nearly always really close to the ground, and it flies much more determinedly. Once you've seen the two flying around together, you'll know what I mean. Now, there are also orange summer skippers, which are completely plain. So you've got the hint of spots with the large skipper. And on the small and the Essex skipper, you've got a completely plain orange underside. The way that people tell the small and Essex apart is by looking at the black tips to the antenna. Well, the large skipper's got black tips too. And if we go back to the silver spotted, you can see it's got very dark brown, which could appear black under certain circumstances. But what we're looking for if we are trying to separate small and Essex skippers is the way that the antenna stalk changes from orange, which it is in all of the skippers. There is some orange in the stalk, to black. But let's not worry ourselves about that now. You are not going to see a small or an Essex skipper before June at the earliest, and I would think July is more likely. The large skipper you might well see by the end of May. And the large skipper's got these pale marks. If you find a skipper with no pale marks at all on it, then it is definitely worth getting a photo and telling people about it, because any of those flying around in May would be phenomenally early. I'm finishing by saying something about recording your butterflies. Please do. This is the easiest way. I Record Butterflies, a free app. You can get it whatever type of phone you've got. You can get it from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Really great. It predicts what you're likely to see, and it's unerringly accurate. It helps you by doing the GPS if you allow it on your phone. You do have to register, but as far as I know, you don't get any adverts. You don't get anything from it, apart from the fact that you use it and it stores your records, and it will occasionally tell you that you've submitted, I don't know, 50 records already this year or something, but that's about as troublesome as it ever gets. So it's really, really useful. Just before we finish up, I'll just see, were there any questions about the skippers?
No, but we've had a question about small and large whites. Are they
Oh,
noticeably different in size?
not always, I'm afraid. Usually, the large white is about the size of a brimstone. But unfortunately, if the caterpillars weren't very well fed, they can be small. That applies to every butterfly species. You can get small versions of every species if the caterpillars manage to get just enough food to survive and turn into an adult, but not quite enough to grow as big as they would normally. So you can get small, large whites, if that makes sense. Small size large whites, which look very similar in size to small whites. So I wouldn't go entirely on the size to identify them. Just carrying on with the recording theme, and I'll take any other questions in a moment. Just to mention that you can enter records in all sorts of different ways. You can email them in if you want to people, but there's also this thing called the recording portal butterflies for the new millennium. That's if you prefer to go home and put your results in on a PC rather than use iRecord for some reason. We would advise people, if they can, to take part in some standardized recording because it's so much more useful to us rather than hearing that somebody saw a particular butterfly somewhere and we've got no idea whether that was the only one on site or whether they were there for 12 hours before they found it. The standardized recording that the UK BMS schemes conduct, far more helpful. You get a really accurate reflection of each site compared to other sites by using exactly the same method at all sites, so that we can make much more sense of somebody saying they saw a butterfly on a particular site, because we know that they were surveying using the same method as all the other sites. So if that's got a butterfly and another site's got none and another site's got 4, we can compare them readily and meaningfully. You can record everything you see when you're out looking for your butterflies, of course, on iRecord. It is the most amazing program. You can get various sub programs within it. For instance, damselflies. I think there's one on moths coming along. They keep saying it's nearly ready, but it never quite comes, probably because there are 2,500 species of moth. But you can record just about everything you can ever see when you're out. If it's been alive or if it's still alive, you can record it on iRecord. And it's great fun. There are some people, look, learning about butterflies. This was in 2024. So, and Hazel, look, you're here tonight and you were in that picture there. And you're here again. So it can't be all that bad. You've come back for more. You can see there the people are comparing in the picture, the man's left hand, our right hand side, he's got a gatekeeper. And then his other hand, which you can't see so well, but that's a small heath. They're comparing them to see the difference. So hope that's been useful. Are there any other questions, folks?
Question from Julia. Nick, do
Yep.
you think this will be a better year than last year for butterfly numbers?
If I say yes, which I'm going to, don't hold me to it when everything goes completely wrong from now on. I mean, it's been better so far, and the probability is that it will be better. But please remember, we're starting from such a low base. You know, everything suffered badly last year. Most species were down by about 55 to 60%, and some were down 70% or more. So they're not going to bounce back in a moment just because
Yeah.
the weather's good. They've got to breed and go through a few stages of that. Sorry, not the stage. They've got to go through a few life cycles to rebuild their numbers. If we get good weather, they can do it quickly.
Right.
But it may be 2026 before we see a real difference.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nick. That was absolutely brilliant. I
I know
think
it's a lot. I do apologize, but I
no,
rush through because
very
if I
nice.
go slowly, it's even worse, I think.
No,
Like watching paint dry.
that was absolutely brilliant. Remember, there's the walk at Income Hole
Yep.
on Saturday, so please do come along. Um,
If you've got binoculars and nets, please bring them. You probably won't need an identification guide, but by all means, bring it if you wish. And if I just point out that we're going to park, no, we're not. We're going to meet in the parking, which, if you look at an OS map online or whatever, is marked as the parking for Steps Hill. It says something like B4. I've forgotten now. I've forgotten what it says, but it is actually marked as a parking spot and it's not the main car park. So every single time we've done this walk, somebody has rung us when it gets to 5 minutes past the time that we've set off and we're en route to Income Hole, and they say, I've been here for 20 minutes and there's nobody else visible. Where are you? And we say, well, we met at the right place and you've gone to the wrong car park. So
okay.
watch out. We're not going into the main car park for Ivinghoe Beacon. We're parking on Steps Hill. If
Steps Hill, everybody. I'll put a
if
reminder in the
yeah,
WhatsApp group.
if the Steps Hill car park is full, I'm afraid you'll have to go to the Ivinghoe Beacon car park and then cross the road and come back to us.
All right, thank you very much, Nick.
Not
So
at all.
good to know.
My pleasure.
I will stop the recording there.